Okay, so next I'm continuing on with the book, but I am doing a little bit of image in the very beginning, just to kind of a recap. Now, Lambert was a Norman invader of Charles the Bald, and also had ships. Eric was another Norman invader who had ships, apparently like 600. So the Normans are definitely building. Now they're not classed as any king or anything, more as a barbarian. And their ships are smaller, but they still are classed as ships, not boats. And yes, I believe not till like the 900 time, 911 or something, do they actually become classed as some kind of an official lord, or we'll get to that, but right now they're not. Right now they're still barbarian and they're still fighting it out, but they are quite an impressive force. As to this point, they don't really have anybody fighting them. And here you notice with this Norman one, we even have this was at Shutterstock, so I don't know how much is this to be believed, but we have the dragon head of the ship. So we have a lot of that going on, where they really look and appear Viking. So we'll bear that in hand, bear that in mind. Here's a very famous, they have a very famous tapestry. Here they're traveling the world, but they are calling them Norman ships instead of Viking ships. All right. And what else do we have? We still have the division of the maps. Here's Kingdom of Charles, and he's the one dealing with most of the Normans right now. Although Eric the Norman was up here, he was getting into all of this with Denmark. And there's not a lot written about Eric the Norman. I believe that's all history is telling right now, as his name is Eric, as one of the invaders. And you can also start to see, like with the treasures from the Carolingian time, they are becoming more, well, I'll say more refined than the Merovingian. I don't know if this is a legitimate crown, that one. I would be wary of it. But yeah, they're not quite as clunky. They still are a little bit clunky, but not quite as clunky in gold. The books they have, I did have an image of a book in here. I'll try to find it. The books they have are encapsulated in stones. Like right here, you're seeing this. This could very well be a Bible. That's just the cover of it. Whereas, maybe later on, like the book I'm reading now, it might have like the gold filigree on the side or whatever. In the old days, it really was like stones, precious stones were on the book itself. I'm trying. I don't know where that went. I had one. Oh, there it is. That really shows you right here. You can tell the magnificent gems, they're calling it, medieval treasure. It's incredible. So yeah, the learned class was definitely, the written word at that point was given quite a bit of, you call it, idolatry, a little bit of idolatry, as to adorn a book like that. It's incredible. And yeah, okay, we don't have to go on about beer and Andrea, but I imagine they were very good at making beer, although they're talking wine more than anything. And here's a comedy of the whole scene, the Carolingian dynasty, and here we have, I think that one was really, really good and funny, and here he is. He's like, well, let's just cut this part off. We don't need it. So yeah, the kings that's not your portion. You only get this portion. So it's a little bit funny, that one. Really a takeaway of Charlemagne's gathering. He gathered all of that. He was like a Constantine in a way of the era, taking all that land. And now they're just chopping it off. So I think I'll leave it where that book wasn't quite incredible, but any of these are fine. Well, not that guy. Who's he? He's scary. So let's go. I know some of these are like, whoa, who are you? I don't know, but he says he found the vase or whatever. But yeah, the vases, the pottery, still has it still has quite the look of the Merovingian, maybe just a little bit more encrusted with jewels. And they were richer. They were gathering a lot more wealth, from Charlemagne's era. I was going to leave it there. Now I'm like, no, don't leave it there. Okay, I'll leave it there, that silliness. But this plate is quite cute. How it has whales on it, and fish. Probably fish, not whales, but anything else in here that I had? Yeah, this was a good map. Now this was some from the, I don't know if this was an official map or a recent redraw, but it's very good art, whoever has done it. Very nice. This is at a place called, where am I? A place called Cartography Craft. Very, very pretty, isn't it? Very pretty map. Okay, so let's bear this in mind, that the Normans are out there. Charles the Bold is not really doing much with them, aside from being, well, he couldn't move them off that island, and he doesn't have the boats. So it's an odd thing, isn't it, that he didn't really go for a fleet or an army fleet at this point. He's leaving all of the ocean and seas to the Normans. And probably they were very scary. If you think 600 ships are out there, every time you look offshore, you're like, well, maybe, they're the boss. So you can kind of understand why, if you didn't have a fleet of ships, that he didn't embark on it and say, hey, I'm going to make a fleet of ships right now. When they say that the ocean, you couldn't even see the ocean, there were so many ships from the Normans. And this is before Rollo. Okay, so this is all the 800s. Now, I'm trying to get back to exactly where I left off. I believe it was here, yes. In 844, Lothar's first care, after the accommodation with his brothers, was to regulate affairs of Italy. Oh, I did mention one thing wrong. I mentioned that it was Pope Gregory who had the ships up north. It wasn't. It was... I was wrong on that. They did not have an army launched to the north. That was somebody else. It was a Gregory sort of name, but it wasn't Gregory. Okay, so to regulate the affairs of Italy. Pope Gregory IV was dead, and Sergius II, being elected to succeed him, had been consecrated without waiting for the emperor's confirmation. That prince, in order to prevent any future infringements on his authority, sent his son Louis into Italy, accompanied by his uncle Drogon, Bishop of Metz. The prelate was enjoined to assemble at Rome as many bishops as he could collect, and to investigate the circumstances attending the election of Sergius. The new pontiff thought to avert the impending storm by loading the young prince with caresses and paying him extraordinary honours and respect. When Louis went to the church of St. Peter, he waited for him at the top of the steps, and after embracing him with great tenderness, placed him at his right hand, and conducted him to the sanctuary. After some days after his arrival, the Italian bishops assembled to try Sergius. Drogon presided as uncle to the prince. The sovereign pontiff appeared before them and answered all the accusations preferred against him. The verdict of the prelates cleared him from the imputation of misconduct. His election was confirmed, and he took the oath of fidelity to Lothair. It was settled that in future the popes, according to ancient custom, should never be ordained without the consent of the emperor, and always in presence of his envoys. This affair being terminated, Sergius crowned Louis, king of Lombardy, and made Drogon his vicar general in Gaul and Germany. The French clergy, assembled at the palace of Verneuil, found themselves greatly embarrassed with regard to the creation of this extraordinary office. They were well, how it says here, they were loth. They were both, I will say, there was a typo. They were both to refuse anything to a prelate who was respectable from his age, his piety, and his birth. But on the other hand, they were afraid to suffer the court of Rome to assume an authority that might be attended with dangerous consequences. It was determined, therefore, to refer the matter to the decision of a national council. The intentions of Drogon were good. He modestly regarded his determination as a delicate refusal and forbore to make use of the power entrusted to him. Now, I did mention a typo. In the back of this book, there is a section called errata, and they really did go through and list if there was a spelling error. And it is on one page. There weren't very many, so that one I don't believe was listed. It should be both, but it is spelled L-O-T-H, loathe, and they could be saying loathe to refuse, as in hated to refuse anything to a prelate. So let's go with loathe. Maybe that was more correct. And it's just the spelling that got me, because loathe today is L-O-A-T-H-E, more so. So they were loath to refuse anything to a prelate. In 845, the French Empire had never been exposed to so many calamities. It is now experienced. Germany was laid waste by the Normans, and an insurrection had taken place in Provence, in the instigation of Duke Fulcrad, which was not quelled to the rebels till the rebels had sustained a total defeat. It was a long war, no doubt, and young Pepin had collected a fresh army and compelled Charles to grant him peace and to cede him all the kingdom of Aquitaine, except Poitiers, Saintonge, and Agoumois. to be holden as a scythe of the crown. A revolt of Nomeno, Duke of the Bretons, induced the king to march an army against him, but falling into an ambuscade, his troops were defeated, and he felt obliged to fly. Returning, however, with a strong reinforcement, the Duke solicited a pardon and returned to his duty. The King of Lombardy, having attacked the Saracens, who had pillaged the church of St. Peter, was defeated, and with difficulty escaped to Rome. The bishops at this period, as depositaries of the faith, thought that no limits should be assigned to their prerogatives, and the nobles, as defenders of the country, imagined that there should be law. The nobles all standing around saying, "Oh, I imagine there should be law." Charles, pressed by the ecclesiastics, was constrained to swear that their persons and their order he would ever hold sacred, that he would levy no undue import, nor exact from the church any other tributes other than those which had been paid during the reigns of his father and grandfather. The prelates, emboldened by success, dared to present certain canons or statutes to the assembly at Epernay, which were calculated to render them sole arbiters of the state. But they were strongly opposed by the nobles, and the dispute growing warm, the bishops displayed such insolence and pride that the king expelled them from the assembly. Things were in this situation when a nobleman named Gilbert had the presumption to carry off the emperor's daughter and to marry her in public. Charles, who was his sovereign, either did not dare or had not the power to punish him. The three princes met at Merson upon the Meuse, where an assembly of the nobles was convened, but they had not sufficient credit to procure the condemnation of the culprit. They were fain to content themselves with ordaining that in future the crime of seduction should be punished according to law. In 847, at a subsequent assembly, holden at the same place, diverse regulations were adopted, all of which tended to strengthen the friendship that subsisted between the brothers, who were by this time convinced that the preservation of the empire depended on their union. It was decreed that the children of him who should die first should succeed to the dominations of his father, without any hindrance or molestation from his uncles. Provided, however, and molestation at that point meant just corruption of their influence. It's not the same as today. Of his uncles, they always say the uncle did it anyway. Provided, however, they treated them with all becoming respect and submission. By this decision that became a law, which had hitherto become a matter of doubt. When France was divided into different kingdoms, if one of the sovereigns died, the nation thought itself entitled to dispose of the vacant throne, and the sole restriction of confining their choice to the princes of the blood. We have seen Pepin succeed his brother, to the exclusion of his nephews, whom he confined in a monastery. The Austrasian nobles, on the death of Carloman, excluded his children to give the throne to Charlemagne. That prince himself, in the division of his empire, seems to have acknowledged this elective power. If any one of my children, says he, should die, and leave a son, whom the people wish to appoint as his the people do wish. People wish things, apparently. The people wish to appoint as his successor. They didn't have to vote. They just wanted him there. His uncles must give their consent. So it can't just be only the people wishing. The uncles also have to give consent. The recent example of young Pepin, whom Louis the Gentle despoiled of his father's dominions, in order to give them to Prince Charles, affords another proof that hitherto there had been no fixed rule of succession to the throne. This question, then, was first decided by the Assembly of Messines, and had the rule there laid down been strictly adhered to, many commotions and much bloodshed would have been prevented. But it did not long preserve the force of a law. The same noblemen who had adopted it, and will presentingly be seen to reject or recall, to enthrone or dispose their king, according to the dictates of caprice, under the influence of this principle, that the people have a right to the choose, and they have a right to choose their own sovereign. Here we go. A principle which, though it to be true in the abstract, if general, so we want the people have a right to choose their own sovereigns, and though it to be true in the abstract, if generally received without those restrictions and modifications that are indispensably requisite to render it applicable to civilized governments, will ever be found pregnant with destruction to the welfare and good order of society. Were a monarch subject to deposition whenever the caprice of his people might urge them to wish for a change, who would be found willing to take upon himself the burden of royalty? Certainly no one who was competent to bear it either with honor to himself or advantage to the nation. So I'm still a little off on, it seems like the people, they want to do this in italics. No, they wrote it in italic, that the people have a right to choose their own sovereigns. It's a principle, though it be true in the abstract. Okay, so we'll keep it at that it's an abstract wish. Without entering the labyrinth of legal disquisition, or racking up the embers of political fires, the end and object of government may be easily discerned. Its object is evidently to protect the weak from the violence of the strong, the simple from the snares of the crafty, and in short to render all those distinctions which are inherent in the good nature of man, and are given him for the wisest purposes, subservient to the general good, by placing a salutary check on those passions, the perversion of which disturbs the empoison, the very stream they are intended to sweeten and purify. Its end is consequently to promote the happiness of mankind. But will it be contended that when the strong and the crafty become the most numerous and powerful, they have a right to overturn the fabric, erected for so glorious a purpose? It would be a libel on a human nature to admit the supposition. The throne is not holden durante bene placito. In every monarchy there is a compact, either express or implied, between the sovereign and his subjects, so long as the former complies with the terms imposed on him. Whatever they be, he is as much entitled to the possession of his throne as a landholder is to a copyhold estate, on observance of the conditions annexed to his tenure. If the monarchy be hereditary, the same right, the conditions annexed to his tenure. If the monarchy, I skipped that one. If the monarchy be hereditary, the same right, of course, extends to the heirs of the reigning sovereign. And unless some violation of the original compact be proved, no disinheritance can take place without the most flagrant injustice. A deviation from these plain rules, which are founded in truth and justice, ever have been and ever will be found productive of anarchy, confusion, and general infelicity. So they're trying to protect the throne and the heirs. In 848, of this, the French Empire now exhibited a striking example. Incursions, revolts, and depredations prevailed throughout the kingdom. The nobles of Aquitaine, discontented with Pépine, submitted to Charles, but a second gust of caprice soon induced them to forsake their new master and to recall their lawful sovereign. So now they're saying, well, we're not sure about you. What's going on? I don't know if this book has ever been read through. Those pages were tight. Okay, so now we have... Okay, the territories of Louis the German, were laid waste by an eruption of the Sclavonians, who defeated the troops that were sent to oppose their passage. Marseille was pillaged by a band of Greek pirates. How exciting! The Saracens took Benevento by surprise, and becoming masters of Sicily and the town of Berry, they kept the whole coast in perpetual alarm, and made even Rome herself tremble for her safety. In 851, the years 849 through 851, Nomino, who had been created Duke of Brittany by Louis the Gentle, taking advantage of the general confusion, seized the towns of Rennes and Nantes, together with the Provence of Maine and Anjou, and shaking off the yoke of France, openly assumed the title of king. The troubles that prevailed in Aquitaine prevented the French monarch from chastising this rebellious vassal, and while he was engaged in the reduction of Toulouse, which had revolted in the capture of Charles, the brother of Pepin, whom he compelled to assume the monastic habit, the Duke of Brittany died, and bequeathed his principality on his son, Hereford, who, with the crown, inherited the ambition of his father. Charles imagined that the death of the Duke would facilitate the conquest of the Bretons. But the event proved the fallacy of his expectations. The French were defeated with great slaughter, and Charles, arriving to Angers, was there met by Hereford. When a peace was concluded, greatly to the advantage and glory of the latter, who obtained a confirmation of the title his father had assumed, on the simple condition of paying homage to the crown of France. These misfortunes seemed to be overbalanced by the capture of Pepin, who, being taken about this time, was shaved and dismissed to the Abbey of Saint-Médard at Soissons. But the satisfaction experienced by Charles on this fortunate event was speedily allayed by the fresh revolt in Aquitaine, while the inhabitants, instigated by the relations of a culprit who had been recently executed, deposed their sovereign and called the son of Louis the German to the throne, as Charles was advancing to oppose the usurper. Okay, so they are now... somebody had been recently executed, and now the son of Louis the German, they called him to the throne, and they're advancing to oppose the usurper as Charles was advancing. He learned that Pepin, having effected his escape from the monastery, had made his appearance in Aquitaine, where a strong party had declared in his favour. The French monarch, however, pursued his plan of hostilities and was so fortunate as to overcome both his adversaries. The son of Louis was compelled to abandon his enterprise, and Pepin, being again taken, was sent into confinement at Sancy, and his children were constrained to become monks. In 855, when things were in this situation, Lothair was seized with a dangerous disorder. Alarmed at the prospect of death, he resigned to the imperial sceptre and assumed the monastic habit in the Abbey of Prüm, where he expired before the conclusion of the week, in the 51st year of his age and the 15th of his reign. It was the 61st year of his age. I'm not sure I wrote that. I said that. Before his death, he had divided his dominions between his 3 sons. Louis succeeded him in the empire To Lothair he bequeathed the kingdom of Austrasia, which from him took the name of Lorient, and to Charles, Burgundy and Provence. Their uncles, faithful to the engagements they had contracted at Merson, suffered them to take possession of their respective dominions without opposition. The death of Lothair, we're at 856, 857, by multiplying the number of French monarchs, gave birth to new systems of policy. Yes, new rules, new monarchs. The young emperor concluded a treaty of alliance with Louis the German, and the King of Lorraine entered into a league with Charles the Bald, who had recently dispatched his son Charles into Aquitaine, where he was proclaimed king by the unanimous suffrages of the people. But this unanimity was of short duration. He deposed 1 month and restored the next. He deposed 1 month and restored the next. The new sovereign became a victim to the caprice and ambition of his nobles. His father's severity gave additional strength to the spirit of revolt, which was presently communicated to the Neustrians, and in short, the insurrection which became general. Louis the German was invited to depose his brother, and having entered the French territories with a powerful body of troops, a great number of Neustrian noblemen paid him homage at the palace of Saint-Yonne. From thence he advanced to Sens, in the town he was introduced by Venelon, a prelate, stigmatized for his ingratitude and treachery to a monarch. So yeah, so we have this one guy. He's got treacherous. Who, from a simple clerk, had raised him to the archiepiscopal dignity. An assembly of bishops was now convened at the palace of Attigny, where Charles the Bald was formally deposed, his subjects being absolved from their oath of allegiance, and the crown declared to be devolved to Louis the German. I don't know what's gone into my cat has gone insane back there. I don't know why. I believe her friend, another cat, had just left, and so she's going a little crazy. She doesn't know where I went. It's ridiculous. I don't know about this one. The insolent temerity of these rebellious prelates could only be exceeded by the pusillanimous weakness of their sovereign, who, in answer to their decision, published a manifesto unworthy of the majesty of the throne. They should not, said the spiritless monarch, have deposed me without hearing what I had to say in my defence, or at least without a regular sentence of the bishops who consecrated me, who are the thrones on which God reposes, whom he employs to promulgate his eternal decrees. To their paternal correction I have ever evinced a readiness to submit, and I am still endued with the same disposition. Gosh, wow. I'm not going to say they were a learned class or anything, but they sure could hold a sentence a long time. To render this humiliation complete, the culprits remained unpunished, and their persiduous president, Venelon, was suffered to retain possession of his dignity, which he enjoyed in peace till his death. When the news when the news of his brother's invasion was first brought to Charles, he was engaged in the siege of Auxerre, which he immediately raised, and sailing up the Seine and the Marne, hastened to Châlons, and from thence to Brienne, where he fixed his camp and was joined by some of the Burgundian nobles. But his brother found means to seduce his troops from their duty, and had he known how to pursue his... Sorry, these are the stuck pages in this section. How to pursue his vantage, the ruin of Charles had been inevitable. I guess it would be his advantage, yeah, to how he would pursue his advantage. But Louis, instead of marching forward to secure the most important places, amused himself by distributing money to the leaders of the faction, and by issuing orders to convene an assembly of all the prelates in France. He was even prevailed upon to dismiss a part of his army, under a pretence that the disorders committed by his troops might render him an object of aversion to the people. Charles, apprised of his conduct, did not fail to profit by a circumstance so favourable to his cause. Okay, we're going into 859 next. Collecting his scattered troops with the utmost expedition, he contrived by forced marches to reach his brother's camp before Louis and any intelligence of his approach. Before Louis had any intelligence of his approach. So now we're sneaking up, and when he's talking about the marching here, he's really going on by forced marches. So get up and go, we're heading out, you know. A lot of them are on foot, they're infantry, so not as many horses as we thought. The consequence was a complete defeat of the rebels and a restoration to that authority which Charles had so recently lost. This event was followed by an attempt which shows to what a pitch of degradation the weakness of the government had reduced the majesty of the throne. The prelates of France, after assembled at Metz, deputed 3 of their body to Louis the German with orders to inform him that they had incurred the penalty of excommunication by the calamities which he had brought to the kingdom from the introduction of his army. They exhorted him, therefore, to beg pardon of God, to confess his sins, to repair the damages he had committed, to reject all bad counsel, to send back such of the king's vassals as he had taken refuge in Germany, and finally to restore to the clergy their privileges and authority. If he would faithfully fulfill these conditions, they promised him absolution, but should he persist in his I think I really need to take a break on this one. But yeah, should he persist in his errors, he was threatened with all the anathemas of the church. This attempt appeared the more extraordinary as these prelates had no kind of jurisdiction, either temporal or spiritual, over Louis. It afforded a fresh proof that the clergy arrogated to themselves the right of deciding the fate of kings and kingdoms. But the pusillanimity of monarchs seems to have kept pace with ecclesiastical arrogance. To these audacious proposals, Louis replied that if he had given them offence, he asked their pardon, and with regard to the concessions required of him, he would consent to refer the decision of the matter to the prelates of Germany. A state must be verging apace towards its destruction when the monarch who rules it is forced to hold such language as this. The proud pretensions of the prelates were fortified by the mildness of the answer, and at the Council of Savonière they vowed to preserve a strict union between themselves in order to correct the kings, the nobles, and the people of France. Such are the terms of decree. So they're keeping a tap on everybody. All right, keep going. This is 860 through 862. The extensive authority established by Charlemagne was now nearly extinguished. Nobles, prelates, and princes all treated the royal authority with contempt. Baldwin, Grand Forester of the Flanders, had the presumption to carry off Judith, the daughter of Charles, who had already twice married, first to Ethelwulf and then his son Ethelbald, both monarchs of England. Judith married both? I can't believe that one. Yeah, it says the daughter of Charles, who had already been twice married, first to Ethelwulf and then his son Ethelbald. No, it couldn't be a marriage of her. She was married twice, first to Ethelwulf. Maybe he's referring to his son Ethelbald somehow, but I can't believe that's a double marriage, a father-son. That doesn't make any sense. Oh gosh, I knew this chapter was going wrong. Anyway, the king was extremely enraged and had his daughter as well as Baldwin brought to trial, when a sentence of excommunication was passed upon them. But they found means, after some time, to obtain forgiveness, and being formally married, Baldwin was created Count of Flanders. Prince Louis, Judith's brother, having assisted the Count in carrying her off, was deprived of the Abbey of Saint-Martin at Tours, which had been assigned him as a fortune. Incensed at this punishment, he fled to Brittany, and notwithstanding the king's prohibition, married Ansgard, the daughter of Count Hardwin. The loss of a battle, however, induced him to solicit forgiveness, which he obtained on condition of future amendment. So yeah, I guess that needs to be researched a little bit more. There's what happened to Judith here, and Ethelbald and Ethelwulf. That was suspicious in this book. Baldwin Grand Forester of Flanders had the presumption to carry off Judith, daughter of Charles, who had already twice married, first to Ethelwulf. Oh, I know. Well, Ethelwulf would have been somebody else completely. That's what happened. And then his son Ethelbald, I believe so, but maybe we need to look into that and find out what happened. That sounds really, really dodgy how they wrote it. Charles, King of Aquitaine, had followed the example of his brother in marrying the widow of Count Humbert without his father's knowledge, and in imitation of him, he now submitted to the king's mercy, and on his renewal of homage was received into favour. Louis the German was equally tormented with his eldest son, Carloman, who retired to Carinthia, where he excited a revolt that required both time and trouble to quell. Thus were these princes, who had set an example of disobedience to their children, severely punished for their uneasiness they had occasioned their father. They too had first taught the prelates to arrogate to themselves a power superior to that of their sovereigns, and they were now convinced of their mistaken policy, by becoming the victims of that inordinate authority to which they had given birth. The King of Lorraine had repudiated his wife, Thiutberga, the daughter of Burgundian noble, under the pretence that she had committed incest with her brother, Duke Hubert. Well, maybe this is an odd time. Maybe these things are happening. A crime of which she had been formally acquitted, but being afterwards induced to confess it, either from weakness or fear, the prelates assembled at Metz pronounced it unlawful for the king to hold any farther commerce with her. Another assembly of the clergy, seduced by Gontier, Archbishop of Cologne, whom the king had flattered with the hopes of raising his niece to the throne, declared at Aix-la-Chapelle that in case of infidelity on the part of the wife, the husband might not only procure a divorce, a mensa e thoro, but a vinculo matrimonii. After this declaration, the ambitious prelate immediately sent his niece to the court of Lothair, who seduced her, and then he sent her back to her uncle. Such is frequently the reward of vice. The prince, profiting by the provocation of the pontiff, dishonoured his family, and to complete the downfall of his pride, publicly married Valdrade, the first object of his love, from whom he had formerly been compelled to part. Okay, I'll leave it at that, but it looks like they've gotten a little dodgy there. And maybe that's why they don't have this online. We don't want to advertise that they were so insipid. Is that the word? It should be.